Right, we next have public input. So we have the Auckland Yacht and Boating Association, regional assets for boat maintenance, and I lost what was up there. Now, apologies to, I didn't get the, so we've got the names Andrew Barney and Richard Steele.
And Blair.
Oh, and Blair Park, sorry.
Richard's online.
Yeah, thank you. And just...
This is Andrew Barney. Richard Steele is on Teams.
Yeah, I just see him there. Thank you very much, and apologies for the delay. I know you were planning to come, the committee, straight after the floods, and so thank you for being delayed, and sorry about that, but I'm sure you understand why.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we've got a 5-minute speaking turn, and then you'll have questions. We'll try and incorporate all that in there, but if you just want to go ahead with your presentation, and then we'll have questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Andrew has a presentation for you.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. My name's Andrew Barney. I represent the Auckland Yachting and Boating Association. We have a 5-minute presentation here. Our concern is a little like the last speaker's, has to do with infrastructure. What we want to do is to outline 2 problems that are facing council, look at some evidential issues and ask where do we go to from here. Basically, we think we've got a significant problem that has an environmental consequence. Those of you who can remember The Perfect Storm, a great movie, will know that when you have 2 complicated low-pressure systems that collide, you get real problems. We've got 2 complicated systems, both of which are too complicated to discuss in depth in 5 minutes, but we think they're colliding, and the consequence will be for the health of the Hauraki Gulf. Essentially, what we've got under the surface quietly is a rapid increase in the number and distribution of marine invasive species, as that graph shows. There are now 11 identified highly invasive species in the Auckland Gulf. They're spreading rapidly, and this is a relatively new escalation in the threat. The primary pathways that have been identified are the hulls of boats. Essentially what happens is invasive species come into the main ports, Auckland, Tauranga, etc., on large ships. Then small recreational boats happily distribute those invasive species out throughout the Gulf, right? So the main vector are small recreational boats that pick up these invasive species off ships. One case study from Tauranga Harbour shows invasive sea squirt. Both of these boats that were found with sea squirt came from Auckland, and neither had prior cleaning on their hulls. Now, Auckland Council has responded well at one level to this response. Basically, under the Local Government Auckland Council Act, you have responsibilities through that Act at the governing body level to make decisions under any enactments or where you have regulatory responsibilities, and you clearly do. The Biosecurity Act, the Resource Management Act, and the Auckland Unitary Plan, Coastal Environment Intentions, for example, all require that the governing body address issues of invasive pest species, including marine species. Now, your response to date, in some senses, has been appropriate, right? January 2021, we got the Regional Pest Management Plan to include marine sections. We've got the Top of the North, the Marine Biosecurity Partnership with 3 other councils. We've got the Clean Below, Good to Go policies that basically compel boaties to clean their boats, and if they don't, they can be up for a $100,000 fine if they don't. We've got a report from 2022 on the capacity and accessibility of haul-out spaces where people can clean and anti-foul boats. So far, so good. What did that report find, however? The report is really concerning for us because what it shows are 2 things. Firstly, Auckland Region has the most boats. If you look at the top row, you can see that Auckland has around about 8,800 boats that need regular cleaning. Now, compared to any other region, that is by far the most boats. But by comparison, we have by far the least amount of cleaning facilities. Only 33% of our boats can be cleaned annually, which means to clean our entire fleet of roughly 9,000 boats would take 3 years with current capacity. Now, the difficulty with cleaning and anti-fouling every 3 years is that the recommended cleaning cycle from your own environmental services staff is probably 6 months. So we're going to end up with a large number of boats that are pretty much ready to carry invasive species around because they simply can't clean themselves in the Auckland region with our current capacity. So effectively, we're also making the situation worse, because by closing down Pier 21, which we've done, and then now by closing down the landing, according to that econometrics report commissioned by council, I add, we've lost 36% of our anti-fouling capacity in the Auckland region in 1 year, right? So we are going backwards here. Now, so far, so good. The difficulty I see, though, is that it's not enough to pass regulations. It's not enough to threaten boaties that we're going to fine the living daylights out of you if you don't clean your boat. If you do that on one hand, that's fine. But if on the other hand, you're taking away our capacity to clean our boats, we've got a real problem. So in the last year alone, we've lost capacity in 6 areas. Pier 21 has shut down. Little Shoal Bay has shut down. Bayswater is now under threat. AYBA is currently contesting that decision in the Environment Court. Milford has had its area reduced. The landing has now just been shut. This is in 1 year. So in 1 year, we've seen an escalation in the number of invasive species, and we've seen a decrease in the number of hard stands available. And we're still opening up marinas without hard stands. So we're increasing the number of boats in Auckland and decreasing our ability to clean them. Now, effectively what we want you to do here is recognise there's a second complicated problem, and that is the allocation of regional amenities to local boards to make decisions. We don't have time to get into this, but we've seen repeated examples where this allocation of regional amenities to local boards has not worked well as a governance structure, and that's the second problem. So what do we want you to do? Basically, what we want here is for you to accept that there is an issue that has to be addressed. If you don't, I think there's going to be a consequence in several different regards. What we want is for the region to accept they have an emergent biosecurity problem, and basically what we want is for you to recommend that we look at an investigation of hard stand capacity in Auckland now. Following on from that, I understand it's possible to recommend that you remove the delegation from the Iraqi Local Board for decisions relating to the hard stands temporarily while we investigate this issue and make an evidence-based decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very quick and fulsome, fulsome presentation on the complex issue. I think you've given the really clear points on that.
Sorry, Councillor.
Councillor Watson has a question, and then Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. So we have a situation where we've got an increase in the number of invasive species at the same time as we're closing down this limited supply of hard stands that anti-foul the boats that are spreading them around, and some quite significant closure. So by my calculations, Pier 21 and the landing takes out over a third of the capacity, the hard stand capacity. I guess the obvious question is, in your view, is the Auckland Council adopting a regional view, i.e. are they looking at the consequences of this across the region, or are these closures, ad hoc closures, actually being enabled by the lack of a cohesive approach to this really concerning issue? So regional versus local, what is that going to mean on the ground going forward over the next 3 to 5 years? Would you like to?
Okay, I think there's actually a risk that we're going to see a balkanisation of responses to this threat where different wards take different approaches. For example, Iraqi Local Board, and that Iraqi ward has 2 marinas in it, but has now shut down its hard stands. Essentially, all of the boats in those 2 marinas are going to have to freeload off the facilities available in other wards. Now, other wards might not think that's what they want, and if they don't want people freeloading off their facilities, then they're likely to make it difficult for those boats to get in there to clean. We don't have enough resources as it is now, and if the wards respond individually, then we're going to see a fragmented response to a really complicated problem. There's evidence that this is already happening. When we look to the regions up north, you cannot get into a marina in the far north region unless you can provide evidence that you've anti-fouled in the last 6 months or cleaned in the last month. And if you can't provide evidence of that, they won't let you in. Now, that model is likely to spread to other marinas, including in our region. So I think the challenge for council is, do we want to try and address this regional threat at a regional level, or are we going to let these decisions around our capacity to clean our boats be made at the local level? And if we do that, I think we're going to see a very, very disjointed response to the problem.
And councillors, one other thing, that hard stand is your asset, you own it.
Richard, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I'd just like to make one comment, and I think the other aspect of maintaining clean hulls and the guidance that's provided by council and MPI is that proximity of those facilities to where boats are moored is of critical importance. Effectively, the movement of boats transmits marine pests. So there is a requirement that imposed by council that if your boat is fouled with a marine pest, it should not be moved. It should actually be cleaned where it is. It should be taken out of the water where it is actually moored and then cleaned. That cannot occur if you've actually got a situation which we've now got in central Auckland, where you've got the majority of boats at Westhaven, Bayswater, OBC, Iraqi Marina, and the only remaining facilities for hull cleaning are the floating dock and Orams. After that, you have to go to West Harbour or Half Moon Bay. So there's the two aspects to this. There's both the capacity, which is an issue, but also proximity to where boats are moored. And that's why I think, in answer to Councillor Watson's comment, this is a regional issue and it needs regional perspective in all of the decisions that are made.
Thank you for that. Now, we have quite a number of questions, and we are supposed to try and keep this all contained to half an hour, and we still have another presentation and local board presentation. So if we could make sure the questions have not already been answered through the presentation and through previous answers. So, right, we have Councillor Walker.
I've got two related questions. The first question goes to the anti-fouling substances. My understanding is that many of these substances are highly toxic, both to marine life but also human life. That while there are restrictions and requirements in New Zealand, boats are coming in from overseas that frankly have substances that are extremely bad. So my question is around the imperative of having facilities not only to deal with the pest, but to deal with these highly hazardous substances, because my understanding is you've got to have appropriate facilities. So I'd invite your comment around that. And that might be Richard Steele or yourself, ambivalent as to who answers it.
All right, I think I'll very quickly point out, and Richard can add to this, the facility at the landing that was shut on February 28th had $3 million of ratepayers' money invested in it in 2007 to bring it up to a standard which is known as the Blue Flag Standard, which means that it's the highest environmentally rated hard stand in the Southern Hemisphere. We're going to turn that into a car park. That's the intention. Richard, any thoughts?
The only other comment I'd make really is that Councillor Walker's really touched on the issue of containment, which is critical for both the application of anti-fouling and also the containment of the waste, the pests and the marine growth that's scraped off boats. A lot of work in the Auckland region historically has taken place at small-scale club facilities. Typically, you'll see them as careening poles or small grids. They do not have the necessary containment facilities. We are entirely reliant on modern equipment of the type that Andrew's just outlined that exists at the landing. So you're going to see more of the smaller club facilities closed simply because they will not be able to meet the containment standards required by council. We understand that, but there has to be an alternative available to enable boaties to comply.
The other question I've got which is somewhat related, is the responsibility of council. And Richard, you might be able to clarify this. My understanding is that the council has a landowner interest in most of the marinas around Auckland, where the provision of hard stand facilities might be required, that we also have a regulatory role, and many of these areas are covered by empowering acts that require boat harbour purposes, and you might acknowledge that boat harbour purposes include hard stand facilities that offer this facility. So I'd invite your comment around council's responsibility as a landowner and a regulator of a number of acts. Thank you.
Richard?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Watson. You're quite correct that there are a number of marinas in the region where there are substantial council land holdings. Hobsonville, Gulf Harbour, to case in point. They do provide the opportunity to both maintain and develop facilities. But we also again have conflicting provisions in the Auckland Unitary Plan. And two examples that come to mind are both Pine Harbour Marina and Hobsonville. At Pine Harbour, the land is in private ownership. It already has planning approval or planning provisions that enable residential and commercial development over the land that's occupied by the hard stand and haul out facility there. At Hobsonville, council owns the land and it is leased to the marina operator. But again, the Auckland Unitary Plan provides for residential and commercial development over the area of land that's occupied by the haul out and hard stand facilities.
Could you repeat that last statement?
Yes, I can repeat that. So at Hobsonville Marina, you have Auckland Plan provisions for the marina precinct, which enable residential and commercial development over the land that's occupied by the haul out and hard stand facilities.
Thank you.
So there is no security for that facility. If you look at Hobsonville and Pine Harbour together, we understand that they account for 25% of the capacity that remains in Auckland after closure of Pier 21 and the landing.
Thank you for that. The next question, we've got Member Henare from the Independent Māori Statutory Board.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. What engagement has your organisation had with either Ngāti Whātua or any of the other mana whenua organisations?
Yeah, kia ora. Ngāti Whātua submitted as part of the public consultation on the refresh of the Pathways to the Sea plan at Aoraki. They wished for the hard stand to remain. There has been a long association between the hard stand and Ngāti Whātua in terms of support for boats coming in and out to work on the redevelopment of the mussel beds, for the removal of boats that were in moorings in the bay. So there's been, and for storage of waka armour. So there's been a long ongoing relationship between the current management, or currently ex-management, of the hard stand and Ngāti Whātua. And they wished for that hard stand to remain. That was their public submission.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for reminding us about that great Northland Regional Council rule for marinas. It's something that we could look at ourselves, I think. I don't think it's evident elsewhere in New Zealand to that extent, but good reminder. Just in terms of if I have a 10, 12 metre sloop today and I ring up all of those yards, there's about, 6 in Auckland at the moment. You have pointed out that maybe some of them may not be there much longer. What's the lead-in time? If I ring up today, how long have I got to wait to make a booking to undertake an ADFL?
I'll try and answer that. The short answer is, unless you give me the exact details of your boat, I can't answer the question. One thing that's been absent from both of the preliminary reports that have been commissioned into capacity is that neither of the authors of those reports spoke very carefully to the boating community. What we can tell you is that boats come in all sizes and shapes and weights, and that particular boat yards have facilities for only some of these boats. So there's a very close relationship between the size, shape and weight of a boat and which yard it can come out at. For example, if you happen to be the owner of a large trimaran, and there are many in Auckland, you've got no options now other than to go to Whangarei to clean your boat, because the landing was the last hard stand that was able to accommodate that particular shape of boat. So what we really need is a granular look at the relationship between the remaining hard stands and the boats that we have. So in short, I can't answer your question. It would depend on your boat.
Andrew, can I add a comment, Mr. Chair? Just a brief comment on that.
Yeah.
One of the key comments in the reports of the Commission, one report was commissioned by Aoraki Local Board and another one by the Top of the North Working Group. Both contain comments regarding the availability of some spare capacity. And that certainly exists. The phrase is some. There has been no assessment of what spare capacity actually exists. But the limited contact that we've had with the authors of the econometric report state quite clearly that they doubt that the spare capacity that's available in existing facilities is sufficient to meet the deficit that's occurring already in Auckland and will only be made worse by the addition of more boats, Kennedy Bay Marina, and the increased frequency requirements for both anti-fouling and haul-out, lift, what we refer to as lift and hold and wash, just basic cleaning exercises. Hopefully that assists Councillor Darby.
Thank you. And I've just had from Orake Local Board says that Ngāti Whātua Orake were supportive of the hard stand being moved. So I just want to, I'll make sure we clarify that for the public record, but just in case that's maybe.
All right, I would have to say I can't speak for Ngāti Whātua, obviously, and I can't speak for that public consultation process. It is my understanding that their public submission was supportive of option 2, which is to retain the cleaning and anti-fouling aspects of a reduced footprint. But it did, in short, it was supportive of a retention of some of the functions of the yard.
Okay, we'll just
yes,
make sure we clarify that.
Yeah, we need to fact check that.
Thank you very much. Last question. Oh, no, it's 2 questions. Councillor Lee. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, gentlemen. Could you resolve a question for us? I understand there are essentially 2 reports circulating on this matter, and you've outlined a significant reduction in capacity for the haul-out cleaning, whole clean policy that the council has been advocating for some years. But there is another report suggesting that if boats were cleaned in winter, sequenced that way, there is sufficient capacity. Could you resolve that apparent anomaly, please?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Lee. Yes, there was an initial report commissioned by the Aoraki Local Board, and the findings of that was that there was spare capacity and that if the landing was to shut, the 1,600 boat movements that would be lost to Auckland could be accommodated in other hard stands in the Auckland area. Now, the methodology that was employed, we don't have time for this, but the methodology that was employed was spatial mapping. In other words, they estimated capacity by essentially looking at the size of each yard. Now, if you know anything about measuring throughput, you don't measure the throughput of a restaurant by measuring the floor area of the restaurant, and that was the methodology in that first report. The second report that was commissioned by the Top of the North Biosecurity Partnership concluded that there was a serious lack of capacity in Auckland. So we have 2 conflicting reports. The second one was far more thorough and it used a well-respected methodology for measuring throughput. The first used a very unusual method for measuring throughput. Because the first report was issued earlier, it has circulated, and I'm aware that a number of councillors will have seen that and been reassured by that first report without necessarily thinking about the methodology that it it adopted. The second report has not been circulated as widely, but it is the report that the Top of the North Partnership rely on. So we have an evidential issue here, which is why we are requesting that, given the significance of these decisions, that we look to put a stop on the closing of the hard stand, not permanently, but until we have some certainty around the consequence of closing the landing. Our view is in line with the econometrics report. We already have insufficient capacity. So that's why we'd like a further investigation, because there's an evidential question here. And I don't think a decision of this magnitude should be made when there is clearly an evidential problem.
Just following up, if I could, Mr Chair, briefly. The previous deputation made the point of a civil emergency and its consequences with the recent extreme weather events. I would suggest that you made the parallel in regard to infrastructure, but I suggest there's another parallel between the two deputations this morning, or the public input and the deputation, and that is if it weren't for the extreme weather events, I suggest that we would be hearing a lot more about the environmental emergency out on Great Barrier and the Mercury Islands regarding a Kalupa infestation. Could you give some idea of the impacts, the practical impacts of this Kalupa infestation, which as it impacts on outdoor boating in this region?
Thanks, Councillor Lee. Look, it's very difficult for many of us to understand what invasive species are actually like, particularly when they're under the water and out of sight. The easiest way I can explain the Kalupa infestation at Great Barrier is that we have released a possum into the marine environment. Kalupa basically kills everything. It smothers the seabed. It strangles mussel beds and any other sort of kaimoana. It makes it very difficult for fish to lay eggs. Basically, where Kalupa goes, you get a dead zone. Now, the difficulty with Kalupa is it's extremely difficult to remove. DOC have been working night and day now for pretty much 6 months trying to eradicate these infestations in Great Barrier Island and Mercury, and they're really not making any headway. Now, the consequence isn't simply environmental. Basically, Kalupa has come into Tryphena Harbour. As a consequence, a controlled area notification has been issued that prevents anyone from anchoring in Tryphena. Now, for those of you who've been to Tryphena, I hope you'd appreciate the economic impact on the businesses in that small local community if boats can't stop there. What we're worried about is Kalupa getting into the inner Gulf. Imagine, for example, if it took root in Waiheke Island. It could. Boats go backwards and forwards between Great Barrier and Waiheke Island all the time. If it was to get into Oniroa, what would happen to the town of Oniroa if there was a controlled area notification that you were not allowed to anchor in Oniroa? And then imagine if it spread further into Mission Bay, into Oraki, into Takapuna. What would be the consequence for the recreational and economic assets in those areas if that pest gets further? So the only current mechanism for controlling this is to stop its spread. We don't seem to be able to eradicate it. And that's the reason that we're so worried about our ability to clean our boats.
Mr Chairman, could I ask your advice here? Can the governing body request the Orake Local Board to pause any changes to the previous arrangements regarding the hard stand for some months to enable this matter to be resolved?
Thank you, Councillor. To my understanding, the process has already taken place for closure, and it would be a very significant precedent for governing body to request at this stage for local boards to stop or reverse a decision. So we don't have that power, and it has been tested under the Chamberlain Park discussion as well in the past. And my understanding is it did not come up under the governance framework review when we looked at delegating things either way. So at this stage, we wouldn't have that power at all to do that.
Can I suggest, Mr Chair, given the circumstances and the potential consequences of the invasive Calliope outbreak in the Gulf, that I suggest that is very reasonable grounds for the governing body, and we are the governing body, we are in fact the regional council, to request the Ōrākei local board. I know that they have terminated the present arrangements, that they haven't taken any steps to make any physical changes to the area. I would ask that the governing body talks to the Ōrākei local board not to take any action which would preempt reversing the situation, because this essentially is a regional matter, if not a national matter. Thank you.
Yeah, at this, especially not at this committee, through public forum, we don't have the ability to A, debate, or B, make a decision. And I would be quite concerned, no matter what the issue was, that we would try and take over the decisions of a democratically elected local board, unless we change that through a future decision of the Governance Framework Review Committee. That would be our only way to do that. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Councillor Lee has rather touched on the question that I have that I'd like to pose to the Director of Strategy. Where we have a very respectful position on the decisions of local boards, I know that we have had other situations that bring into consideration regional matters. What if we wished to actually look at a more regional level, what are the options that would be available, Megan, in terms of, not necessarily at this committee today, but could you outline those remedies that members of this committee could give consideration to?
Through the Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Fletcher. Under public input, of course, our recommendation would be, rather than you making any particular decision here, that if you did want to get some advice around what the options are, what the issues are they as being presented, are there other elements to the issues, then you could ask us to report back, I suggest through this committee, and then that would allow you to then make a decision or get more information or whatever you might want to do out of that.
Thank you for that, Megan, and I note that we have legal advisors here today, but I just wonder, in your recommendations, Chair, whether you would give consideration to a report back, and if so, I'd be happy to move or second.
Councillor Simpson had already asked to move, but you're welcome to second. I had just a brief to thank the speakers, but also the only thing we were able to do through public input is ask for, and I have the writing, refer the matter to, this is all we are able to do under standing orders, refer the matter of hard stand capacity to the Chief Executive for report back. That is the only, yeah, so thank you. And we still have questions. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Leone.
Oh, kia ora. I just wanted to touch on a few things there. As I have been involved in some of the rāhui that have taken place over on Waiheke Island, so I'm well aware of the after effects of some of these issues that you've raised. I just wanted to get an idea in terms of the consultation process or the communication that you've already had with the local boards. Because in my experience, I'm aware that issues have come up around the Hauraki Gulf Forum and protection of Hauraki in the past, and a majority of the local boards actually agreed on some of those issues and were able to implement them. So I just want to get an idea if you've already approached an extensive amount of the local boards in Tamaki Makaurau.
Thank you for the question. There has been interaction between the AYBA and a number of local boards, but not all. We initially felt that it was going to be possible to work with council on this issue, and today I think is probably the end of the road on that option. Given that the decisions seem to be permanently embedded with local boards, our next step will be to go out and talk to specific local boards about their reaction to Ōrākei closing the landing and to the lack of any regional strategy to protect the Hauraki Gulf. We are also going to be speaking to the Hauraki Gulf Forum to see if they can swing into action behind us. I appreciate that the allocations have been made. However, we are looking to challenge the entire process of allocations. The decision to allocate local boards without reflecting on the impact on regional amenities, where you have regional amenities sitting on a local board, seems to us to have been an oversight of the decision of the committee that made that decision in 2013, and we're looking to proceed with a legal challenge to that decision. So, in short, in answer to your question, one of our strategies from here is to go out and balkanise. We don't see any other option. If we can't get the local boards, if we can't get a regional response to this problem, then we'll have to go out to the individual local boards and address the issue locally with them. What happens after that, I don't know, but it's seemingly to us, it's the only other option. If we can't get the governing body and council to respond to this lack of capacity, we'll have to deal with the local boards. It's more work, obviously, but that's our next option.
Thank you. Last question, Councillor Turner.
Thank you. West Auckland people would simply say, we don't want this nonsense to affect our harbour either. What is the time frame, the growth frame for this invasive species? I'm just looking at the time frame of its ability to invade while we're talking about it.
If we're talking specifically about Calopa exotica, which is only one of 11 highly invasive species here, but if we talk specifically about Calopa, the infestation in Blind Bay in Great Barrier was identified when that infestation was smaller than 1 square metre. In the 6 months since they've been observing and attempting to eradicate that infestation, it's grown to cover hundreds of square metres. This thing spreads very quickly. So our real concern is, given that we don't seem to be able to eliminate it, that if we aren't able to ensure it doesn't spread further, we've got a real problem. At the moment, the only management technique that seems to be working is to issue controlled area notifications to prevent boats from anchoring in the areas where it's infested. But little by little, if it spreads, we've got a really significant issue here. So that's one of 11. I can't speak to the rate at which it's, the other species spread, I'm afraid.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, just a question to you. Can we firm that up to some sort of timeframes of when the report's going to come back by?
I'm sure we would, so the next planning committee meeting is the 31st of March, just because of the holiday, you know, the deferment of meetings over Easter in April. So I think the next, so it's 31st of March, and then it must be May or something. If we were to report back on the 31st of March, it wouldn't be in detail on it, but it would give a sense of some of the issues to consider, and matters of budget and prioritisation, and whether this is something you would want to do. So it would be that level of reporting we could do by March.
I think any level as fast as possible is a good start.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, is it possible that we could make a request, as you've said here, for the matter to be referred to the Chief Executive to report back? Can that be done under urgency?
So the main issue is that anything, so we've got a massive budget issue at the moment, and councillors have also recently voted to stop all discretionary spending. So there isn't, as far as I know, Megan, there isn't actually any additional capacity to do this work, but we will try our best to get as much done as possible, but there is no extra budget or time for staff to be doing this, but we will do our best to get something back by the 31st. How detailed that could be, and also keeping in mind that we do not have the legal power or could not change that in a small time if we wanted to on decision-making between local boards and governing body. We spent 3 years doing that last term, and unfortunately this, for those who want that change, that wasn't part of that decision-making process at that time. That's quite a fulsome and could have wide implications either way. Right, so last question, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if it would give, and while I accept that it may not be as comprehensive, but on the basis of what the Director of Strategy has said, it may give some comfort to members of this committee and to others for report back at the next meeting of this committee. As a seconder of this, I'm very happy for that qualification that there will be some report back at the next meeting. I wonder whether the mover would be willing to accept that.
We could just say by the, yeah, it doesn't,
Mr. Chair, Richard Steele, I just wonder whether, in fact, the motion that is just being amended now might also be made clearer that we're referring to hard stand capacity to enable compliance with Council's own rules and regulations regarding marine biosecurity requirements.
So thank you, Richard. I think at this stage the motion was already sort of wider than what we can do under standing orders already. So I think we will ensure the Chief Executive reports back based on the information he's heard at this meeting. If we get to prescript, it's sort of not what we can do under public input, fortunately, but thank you.
All right, appreciate it.
Councillor Leone, did you still have a question or you? No. Kia ora. Okay, well, thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation and very good answers to all the questions members had. So we will, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Anyone opposed? Cool, thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that there's a lot of information already on the public record, so we obviously have the contacts of the submitters today.
Yes.
To get information that is already there. We don't have to create it, it's already there.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor. The next up we have pest-free Kaipatiki.
What do they want to do there?
Annie and we have Annie and Fiona.
And we tried to highlight that in 2013.
Right. We have Annie and Fiona from my hood in Kaipatiki and Chris's hood. Just want to acknowledge all the work that you do, what you've been doing, and I think your presentation is going to be focused on what you've been doing throughout the flood and cyclone, maybe what happened in the weekend, and also, have they got okay.
I think they've stolen the clicker.
Yeah, is there a slide shift?
Oh, those bodies are untrustworthy lots.
State of the missing clicker. So, Annie, you'll have 5 minutes with some questions, and then we will thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, as Richard said, I'm Annie Dignan, and I'm really fortunate to be the General Manager of Pest Free Kaipatiki, and Fiona is my colleague, and she's the Senior Restoration Advisor. For those of you who don't know, Pest Free Kaipatiki is a network of 61 reserve groups and clusters of neighbours. 61 is a lot, 61 reserve groups and clusters of neighbours. And we've also got thousands of volunteers throughout our area, in addition to those reserve groups. Those individuals and our reserve groups, they're working incredibly hard. Kaipatiki is, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure most of you do, it's incredibly diverse. It's biodiversity, it's forested, and it effectively acts as the lungs of Auckland. It was doing the work we all need it to do. We're long-term partners with the Auckland Council, and we're really grateful for this. And the support has allowed us to offer a vast program, and we touch on, I'd say, the lives of most people in our ward. We bring the community together to focus in the areas of pest control, of restoration, climate change mitigation, carry dieback and biodiversity, to name but a few. I did say our program is vast. But the purpose of being with you here today is to really highlight the value of volunteers and what contribution PFK volunteers have made, as Richard said, in response to the flood and cyclone, but also importantly, we really want to talk about what contribution and value volunteers could add to the city in the future. So I'll just hand over to Fiona.
Okay. So we're a relatively nimble kind of organisation, being an NGO supported by the council and a number of other partners. And our response to the recent flooding has been threefold. So the first thing we did was we started to work around the community's fears of slips and tree loss in that kind of area. And we pulled together next our extensive community network for the rather cathartic experience of sharing their experiences with the floods on their reserves, of course as reserve reps, on their homes and their personal lives and community.
Going, I don't want to go.
Kia ora, Alf, you've just got your mic has gone off mute.
Kia ora.
Yeah, so that was an extremely valuable opportunity in our community, and it actually opened quite a lot of constructive dialogue with our network as to how they can play a part alongside council in some collaborative, solutions for the damages that we're seeing in our community environment. And most recently, we've worked with the council and our Kapatiki local board to bring together this network of highly skilled, really knowledgeable volunteers in our network to work in a task force cleaning up some of the non-technical, safe kind of damage that's happened in our parks. Things that, to be quite honest, the council contractors aren't going to get to for a long time. And fair enough, they've got an awful lot of other high priority risk sort of things to be doing. Now, things like, for example, block drains, fallen trees, debris, and that kind of thing. Now, we've just completed that approved pilot in the Rangatira Reserve with the Kaipāriki Task Force, and it's proven to be quite successful, quite useful, and it shows great potential actually to assist, well, we believe, to assist the city in responding to the damages of this flood. And in the future, after we've done all this work and had the cleanup, that it offers a significant number of efficiencies and savings in our eco-contract area of work in the community facilities. We believe our volunteers can play a really good role in this space and saving the city some funds that are tight. So the reason why we worked in all three of these spaces with the task force, etc., is that volunteers want to be part of this solution. And I'm sure that's not just in our local board area, but it'll be seen right across Auckland. We wanted to bring the community together because we know that volunteering for the environment and in the environment definitely improves well-being, right? In a time where our communities are really stressed, the environment is a very diverse medium to heal people. And significantly for this audience, is what we want to talk about, is that the task force and work with volunteers represents a really large saving and efficiency by volunteers simply finding, reporting and getting on with work. And that will hopefully be a cost saving at the end of the council contract program. We know there are many, many tough decisions ahead of all of you when it comes to budgeting and balancing the numbers. So we believe that drawing on people and the networks that are already established, programs ready to go, is definitely a sensible fiscal decision, and you may very well be able to eliminate some waste.
So, yep, so it said that we've had a partnership with council for the previous 7 years, and this has been an investment in resources and training and time to build relationships. And the outcome of this has been this network of skilled and committed and connected volunteers. We want to make sure that this investment continues to offer, maximum returns for both, or all three, for the community, the environment, and obviously the budget. And we know that the community matters to you. I'm sure that's why you stood for your roles. And we also know you've got a number of commitments. The Thriving Communities strategy, PFK are contributing to all 4 of the goals in that strategy. On today's agenda, you're discussing the report of the 3-year annual plan, and it notes that there needs increased progress in the areas of supporting community connection and resilience, and to improve mental and physical health. Now, we're doing this work, so we're a not-for-profit environmental community organisation, and we're showing leadership in this space. But what the key reason we've come to you today is we know we can be doing more with increased leadership from this audience. We could have greater impact. So the three key areas that we're asking for your leadership and input: firstly, recognise the value, and the value in every sense of the word, in partnering with volunteers. In some instances, I think this will be philosophical and certainly operational change in the way that volunteers are considered. Our volunteers are skilled, they're willing, and they're deeply connected with their reserves. Secondly, the second area we need your leadership is in advocating for council eco-contract and volunteered shared programs. This is a really big roadblock in achieving what could be done in this space. Together we can make far greater impact more quickly and significantly save efficiencies in funding. If you're not already aware, there's significant frustrations in the community. We see time and time again waste. We see areas that have been planted get mowed. We see a number of things that's just very frustrating and hard to keep people engaged when it's one step forward and two steps back. So we see that this is an area where significant gains could be made. And we've got the pilot of our Kaipātiki Reserves Task Force, which is really highlights a solution as to how we could operate in this space. We've got some great relationships with council staff, but what we're reliant on is those handful of dedicated staff. We want to move beyond that. We want this way of working to become the norm, where we're not at the behest of, a dedicated staff member. And finally, we need your leadership by continuing to fund collaborative environmental programs such as the Natural Environment Targeted Rate and the local wood funding. Volunteers are literally giving hundreds of thousands of dollars of effort annually, and that's within our group alone. That's across the city, but I know that other groups are struggling with the same issues that we are. And that just the value, and that's just, when I say hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's just the value of the work. That's not the other spin-off collateral things like the health benefits, the mental health things, the connected community, which is so important to us all. So, so we want you to value this work and assist us to build a thriving community. And I really think that now is the hour. Thank you for your time.
Thank you both. And thank you for the organisation. This, just to clarify, this group, Pest Free Kaipātiki, started with a few people in our community, or years ago really, and I think about 7 or 8 years ago formed properly into Pest Free Kaipātiki and are now in all of our reserves nearly, and neighbourhoods, and have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers and save us already a lot of money as a council, and because of all the extra work they do on top of what our contractors and staff are able to do. Right, we've got a number of questions. Councillor Sayers first.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I really enjoyed the presentation. I think it touches on a much wider concern that volunteers have right across Auckland. So it's great that you pulled together and you got your group together and had your meetings and carried forward. So that was very pleasing to hear. A great role model. So the question I have is just trying to get greater clarification. It's not really trying to add about how this could be scaled, right? So it's not, for me, it's not just about the cost saving, but it's more about the roadblocks that you kind of touched on. I know the council staff will be doing their very best, and all credit to them, but I think you're trying to explain to us what could get out of the way in terms of the red tape for volunteers. So I didn't quite get a feel, Mr. Chair, what those things are. Maybe there's some examples.
You may hear a very long list, but
well, I need to know. So thank you, Chair.
No. Yeah, thank you for the question. And you're right. I would love to. You're right. There's a long list, Richard, of examples. A clear, obvious example for me is we have got, as I said, highly skilled, trained volunteers out there, and we've got eco-contracts where they might have 4 hours in one of our local reserves. And we've seen many, many times where an eco-contractor has gone to that reserve and they have spent 3 of those 4 hours looking for the issue. So they've showed up there in a truck, there's 3, 4 of them, and they wander around in the reserves looking for potential issues, and they find one within 3 hours and they work on it for an hour. Down the road, Birkenhead War Memorial, got a fabulous reserve group there. They discuss amongst themselves what's the biggest issue in our reserve right now. They contact, one of them happens to have the contacts of the contractor. They pinpoint it on the map, they take photos of the issue and they say, this is the biggest challenge for us in our reserve right now. And that contractor is able to go there with the right tools, the right people, and spend 4 hours on that job. And the biggest impediment to that happening across the board, so we're already adding that value, but much more on an ad hoc basis. The biggest impediment to us being able to do that is a standard work practice. And this is what we'd love to see. We'd love this to be a standard work practice where we're sharing the information. If one of our volunteers goes down, as they are at the moment, and chopping limbs that are crossing tracks and things like that, we need to be able to share the fact that that work's taken place. Otherwise, council are going to, they've already had 20 people complain about it on the report a problem page. No one knows that 20 people have done it. They all think they're the only one. So they're still going to send a truck with 3 people to cut down that limb. Standing by and seeing this waste is painful. And it is also very disempowering for our volunteers. Our volunteers find it very frustrating. That's one example. And what we could do to change that is it's about getting the right people around the table with high enough up the food chain. But the message has got to be, and that's what the message has got to come from here, that volunteers can play a vital part in this. And so if we got the right people around the table and we had effective communication channels where we can share the report a problem. Now, we can do it as an organisation. We've got a more advanced system than the report a problem page because we can show when the problem's been fixed. And we can also show when the problem's been reported. And then we can share that with council. But what we need is for that information to come back. We need a similar system to come back to us. So a lot of it is actually in that those channels of communication. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It's helpful, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I just want to pick up on what you've just described. What you're referring to on your part is an app that I think Keith Salmon, Richard Steele and the like have developed at incredibly little cost. This app, correct me if I'm wrong, enables you to capture the input on the part of volunteers across any number of pest activities. And what you're asking is for that app to be able to communicate with the council's app. That is correct?
Yep, absolutely. And
okay.
It's in a compatible format.
And further to that, would it be possible for your group to inform council on value, because you can take that app, you can take the work that it generates and assign a value to it, so that we as council, and particularly the mayor, because he's right on to fixing things and making savings, so that we can be informed around the incredible value that you are providing that is saving us hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of dollars a year. Thank you. And you're welcome to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, as an example, Fiona talked about the task force and the weekends. We had 28 volunteers out there in Rangatira Reserve, and we worked for 2.5 hours clearing drains, those kind of things. And when I say clearing drains, it sounds like a minor work, but actually I would say a significant amount of the damage that was caused in our reserves, and Kaupatiki reserves have been very affected by the floods and cyclones. A significant amount of that was because of poorly maintained drains and culverts. So we were in there, 28 people in there for 2.5 hours doing a power of work, People worked like Trojans. I had to stop them at the end of the day. I've still got sore muscles. That alone, and as Fiona said, we don't know when contractors would have got into that reserve to open up those tracks. I suspect it'll be a wee way away. So in terms of being able to say that 28 hours times 2.5 hours, simple things like that, yes, we can easily do those numbers, yeah.
May I add something to that just really quickly? We're really not about creating more work. We're very, very conscious about doing that. Everyone's under pressure. So, utilising systems that are already in place, things are absolutely ready to go. It's just we need those communication channels to be sound. I think there's a willingness, but at the end of the day, there's just a few roadblocks in that actually happening. So getting around the table with the right people and having a mandate to share information quickly and effectively, I think it can save our environment and our city a great deal in this time of stress. Thank you.
Thank you. And to just clarify, and I know you did mention at the beginning, the Auckland Council staff and local board staff supported what happened in the weekend and supported that work. So they have been, we just need to have that on an everyday sense. So we are seeing good change driven by you all, but we need that.
Yeah, but it's the systems beside it,
as well,
that
yeah.
we're sharing that information. That's what needs to happen. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Darby.
Thank you both. Wonderful presentation. Just running out of time, so I'll just be brief with my question. Can you just give us a sense of how does the community see and own the outcomes and delivered when there is a community involvement and real participation in the projects and programs compared to when council does it to a community? And the second question, and I'll be quick, is can you identify any risks in developing this program up and formalising it, e.g. health and safety?
I'll answer the first part of that because it's very dear to my heart, that whole community. As I said, we're a community environmental organisation. So the bringing people together, whether it's for environmental action or whatever, we know that I think the research shows that 79% of the people that engage in volunteer activity come to meet their neighbours and meet their community. We're seeing we cannot meet the demand as an organisation of the people who want to be engaged with their community. And I think particularly now, I would say, as a response to the flood, we can't sit by and expect that someone in a helmet and a high-vis vest and overalls is going to come knocking on our door and see how we are. In my experience in my neighbourhood, it was my neighbours. It was my neighbours who ran over and saw that we were flooding and took my kids away. It was another neighbour that ran up the street with her spa pump, to see whether she could stop the thing coming through. And that's because they know my name and they know the name of my children. So we are hugely about bringing the community together. A lovely example I had in the weekend, is I had a woman, a very well-known, internationally known botanist who was volunteering for us, and she thanked us at the end of the day. She said, "Thank you for organising this event. You have given me the opportunity to do something that I feel proud of, and that sense of pride will stay with me all week." And I thought, isn't that amazing that we can provide an opportunity for her to feel proud? And I felt proud of that. And the reason I love my job is I could give you so many examples of where we bring the people together to work on a common problem. So that's a huge part. I'll let Fiona answer the health and safety aspect.
Thanks. 100% agree with you. We value our volunteers and our community's health and safety extraordinarily high. This work is, admittedly at the moment, the task force is relatively non-technical. They're well assessed in advance. They're all approved by the council. We provide the information, it's reviewed, bingo, we're ready to go. It's all logged in the system. It can be followed up on. No, absolutely, really high. Health and safety is a major in this case. There is a level of mid-range sort of activities and tasks that we believe volunteers could do that needs further discussion with the council, because after all, the council facilities program does need to be up to a certain standard and that kind of thing. But our network is of thousands of people, including retired engineers, builders. So there's a great deal of skill out there and a willingness to help. It's the matter of meeting together and getting a work program and getting on with it.
And just to add one point to that, the council's investment in us as an organisation has already allowed us to do things like make sure they are trained and they've got appropriate PPE. So you've already made that investment.
Thank you. We've got a number of questions, so please try and keep them to stuff that we have not heard yet. Deputy Chair, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Annie and Fiona, for your presentation. I've really enjoyed it. You've spoken a lot to community resilience and social cohesion based on all the work that you're doing and with your volunteers, and the return of investment by council must be, I don't know if you've been able to quantify it, but if you could let us know what the impact of the proposed budget cuts will have for you in the space of all of the work that you're doing. And if you can quantify it in terms of the return on investment, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much. Excellent question. The return on investment, of course we're rather biased, but it really is hundreds. It's so far, it's a small input to the community organisations like us, and we're only one. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of volunteer hours, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that is only what we're measuring. We know that everything we report back to on our programs is an underrepresentation by far, because getting information back is sometimes difficult. So it's actually a far higher figure, and that doesn't take into account the social well-being. I do not know how to put a dollar value on that, but it's huge. In terms of the budget, the proposed changes to the discretionary local board funding and the targeted rates, environmental targeted rates that impact on RENH and the CCFG funds, the Community Coordination Fund, will significantly have an effect on organisations like ours. For us, 72.5% of our funding is provided through the local board or Auckland Council grants, depending on the programs and support and that kind of thing. The rest is through others like Foundation North, the Lotteries Department, that kind of thing. So it will have a really large impact, and so, and again, Annie's mentioned, the investment. We've got a partnership with the council now for 7 years, and our program is one of the widest, I think, in this area of community facilities. So a huge amount of investment has already gone in, and like I mentioned, the per dollar that you put in, volunteers are just giving so much back. So it doesn't make sense, I don't think, ethically, morally, strategically for the environment, for community well-being, or the budget to cut that. So we're in opposition of the proposed reductions to those funds.
And just to give you an idea of some specific numbers, Fiona said we underestimate because it's very hard to get volunteer hours, but I think we're around the 16,500 volunteer hours a year. And if you were to do the maths on that at kind of minimum wage, you're looking at like $500,000 of volunteer effort. So, but that, as I said, that's not the other, that's not the social health or any of those things. It's really hard to equate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Councillor Turner, question.
Thank you. Most of the questions have been answered. Very informative. I do strongly support the fact that council does not leverage the best result out of it, practical result out of its volunteers. Does your organisation have paid staff that are facilitating, organising, and
Sure. We do have a number of paid staff. So we've got senior restoration advisors, we've got an educator who's working with schools. So they're out there galvanising the community and making sure that, so our vision is one, not our vision, our mission is one where we inspire, educate and resource the community. So we've got staff to do that.
so are you happy that there's not a duplication of those activities between yourself and council?
I would say there are some similar roles, but luckily we are able to work closely with those people to make sure that there isn't the duplication. We're also sometimes in the advantageous situation where we can get places because of our network and deliver some of the information that those council staff may want taken into spaces that they may not necessarily have access to.
Thank you. That's the only area of concern I hold with that sort of funding.
Yep.
Thank you.
Member Ashby.
Kia ora, thank you for the presentation. And yeah, first, just quickly acknowledge all the good mahi you do, very familiar with your crew. Just a quick question from me is totally supporting the efficiencies and understanding, for my own part, the issue and what you're asking for. It's just a quick question in terms of the comms alignment and program that you're talking about, where iwi fit into that. Kia ora.
Thanks very much for that. We are really lucky that for the first time this year we've got support through the CCFG fund for a small amount of funding to bring on a Te Tao coordinator, an activator. We've actually shared the role with another local board, another organisation like ours, because it wasn't quite enough to bring on someone on. Now we've got enough for a full part-time staff member. And they are building, they're building relationships with mana whenua, helping to develop iwi-led restoration activity in both our local boards, as well as capacity building, because that was something that was identified as definitely lacking in our organisation, something that we've put a big focus on in our strategic and operational plans. So we're early days, but there's some amazing amount of growth and potential there, particularly in our local board in the areas of, Beach Haven and Birkdale, which have really, strong demographics of mana whenua.
Thank you. Mayor Wayne Brown, sorry, you've got a...
Thanks for that. I'm quite happy to be a champion for volunteers and their enthusiasm. I'm a champion for sea cleaners, and we clean up endless bloody messes in the creeks around here. And we spend kids, we educate children about not bestowing stuff in there, but every time we go back, it's still full of the same stuff. What I thought you were is a cry for some form of council coordinator, because there is a fair bit of people doing the same thing in the same areas, and I don't understand quite how council coordinate that, so I'm just going to ask that it's as a result of this, we support that, but someone could explain in the future, not necessarily now, just how we can coordinate all this to get the best result out of it. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor, and we do have a additional wording to the motion up there that we will ask for a bit more information and get potentially not a report, but just how we can get more information and bring that together through the executive lead team at council. Right, Councillor Ferry. All right. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to confirm, you just operate in the Kaupatiki area, right?
Yeah, we do, but we are pretty confident, and we hear it repeatedly from our friends at council, that we are, probably the largest and the role model for other organisations. So we are really open and sharing of our resources and information with others. So try and share our expertise as widely as we can, but our operating area is strictly within Kaupatiki, yeah.
So we would still need our council teams that work in this space to service the rest of Auckland then?
Oh no, we could expand. No, I'm just joking. But
just mindful that we're in the middle of annual budget discussions and. Yeah. Teams are being proposed to be cut, work is proposed to be cut from the council, and I don't want people to think that we'll just cut the teams doing environmental work in council and rely on volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely not. And as Fiona said, we're largely funded by council. You are investing in us, so absolutely we don't want to see cuts to those services, and to the budgets that we talked about, because We will, we've just moved into new premises, the old Glenfield Bowls Club, and it's fabulous, but I'm concerned that I'm going to be looking around the table at a much reduced staff group. And actually, to be honest, I'm the general manager and I'm part-time, and the hardest money to find out there is for me as the general manager and our finance person. So the team of restoration advisors and ecologists that I've got, they might still be there, but they're going to have to learn how to do Xero and payroll and everything else, because there's not a lot of money to fund the general manager and the finance person. So, that's our reality. So I'm concerned that we're going to be looking at a much smaller organisation. So we've showed you what we deliver now, but I don't know what we'll be looking at delivering under the proposed budget.
Same as us.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I'm just mindful that we have groups out in my ward, in the Manukau ward, who are doing very similar work, and they also rely heavily on the local board funding. The Otara Lakes and Waterway Trust, they do our Adopt a Spot and Neat Streets programs, and do the restoration of the waterways around there. And they've had similar issues where they've organised a big planting day with our local schools. The schools go along, do all of that work, and then our council contractors come along and mow it down.
We've had one done 3 times.
Yes, so I certainly tautoko those issues that you raise around that, and I look forward to us being able to coordinate better, communicate better, and get that issue solved. Can I just encourage you, though, to reach out to those groups out south? We've got the Manukau Beautification Trust, Otara Lakes and Waterway Trust, and in Mangere, I believe our marae does a lot of work around their waterways with I Mangere and ME Services. I think some coordinating and some advice would be really much appreciated by those groups. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair.
Cool. Thank you, sorry. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just want to acknowledge the governing body here, the committee here. We approved, and you might not remember last term, a base for this organisation on the proviso that they wouldn't come to council for any money to upgrade, to set it up, to fit it out of the old bowls club that was falling apart. How much did you come to council for that complete fit out upgrade and to make it livable?
Oh, was it to come to council? I don't know that we came.
13,000 via the local board?
Yeah, I think the local board it gave us an additional 13, but I don't think we didn't come back to council for.
Yeah, so we were told. Council was told at the time it would cost us 300,000. Was it no 600,000?
I think the estimated cost was something like 730,000 to restore. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were told at the time that it would cost 730,000 council dollars to restore, and this group managed to restore based on volunteering hours and 13,000 from the local board. So we do need to look at how we can build on what groups like this do. So I just want to acknowledge you. We do have the a resolution up there just about getting a bit more information so we can see how we can further improve. I know you've passed this on through many channels over the years, but and I do want to acknowledge through the questions of Councillor Dalton that this may be difficult after the budget if it stays as it is, because you're going to lose that quite a significant chunk of your funding, which helps us reduce our costs. So it's about how we find that balance definitely through the budget. I've moved this and Councillor Darby's second. And thank you very much. All those in favour? Aye. Any opposed? No. Cool. See you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.